Through my sister's lies, my parents sent me to rehab for drugs. I spent 2 years there while she was out partying, selling, and using. She showed up drunk at my wedding, uninvited, and we were on a family vacation, a trip I'd been looking forward to for months. Not that I was super excited about it, exactly. I just kind of hoped that, for once, maybe we'd all get along. I'm 17, and my half-sister, Cindy, just turned 14. We grew up together, but there's always been this weird tension between us, something I could never quite put my finger on. Cindy's my dad's daughter from his second marriage, and even though nobody ever talks about it, that split in the family felt, well, present, in little ways that seemed to drift between us. This vacation was supposed to be a chance to bond, or at the very least, for our parents to get some downtime without playing referee to our usual back and forth. We were at a beach resort, the kind with endless pools, sprawling palm trees, and every corner practically screaming relaxation. For the first couple of days, it almost felt like a perfect getaway. But on the third day, things started to unravel. Cindy and I were sitting by the pool, killing time while our parents ran off to the local market. She was scrolling through her phone, not paying me a lick of attention. Honestly, we'd been sitting in complete silence for at least half an hour before she finally looked up at me. "So, do you even care that everyone thinks you're a total loser?" she sneered, not even bothering to pretend it was a joke. I blinked, caught completely off guard. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Oh, come on," she huffed, rolling her eyes. "You really think people don't notice the way you just, drift around school without any friends?" It wasn't the first time Cindy had taken a shot at me, but this one stung. I tried to brush it off, keeping my face blank. "Well, I'd rather be alone than hang out with people who do nothing but gossip and spread rumors," I replied, wondering why this was even coming up. "You're so pathetic," she said, a twisted little smile playing on her face. "No wonder nobody likes you." I opened my mouth to snap back, but something stopped me. What was the point? We'd been down this road before, her finding ways to put me down while I scrambled for a comeback. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction this time. I stood up, walked away, and decided to just let it go. I figured that was the end of it. But it wasn't. Not even close. That evening, when we all sat down for dinner, I could feel Cindy's eyes on me. She barely looked directly at me, but there was this smirk on her face that made my stomach turn. She was acting quieter than usual, throwing me sidelong glances every now and then, a look I couldn't shake off, one that felt like she had something planned. She kept glancing my way, a glint in her eye like she knew something I didn't. After dinner, I excused myself and went back to our shared room, hoping to just unwind with some Netflix. Not long after, Cindy came in, eyes glued to her phone, fingers flying as she typed. "What's so funny?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She looked up, all innocent. "Oh, nothing. Just chatting with some friends." "Right," I muttered, rolling my eyes. I wasn't in the mood for another round with her, so I let it go. But the next morning, things felt off. My parents were acting strange around me, almost like they were uncomfortable or maybe even suspicious. Mom, especially, kept sneaking these sideways glances my way. Eventually, while Dad was busy with coffee, she pulled me aside. "Honey, we need to talk," she whispered, looking worried. "Is there anything you want to tell me?" My stomach dropped. "No." "Why?" Mom hesitated, her eyes darting around like she didn't want anyone overhearing. "It's just, Cindy mentioned something, and I thought it was best to get your side." "Mentioned what?" I asked, feeling a knot of dread tightening. Mom sighed, looking away for a moment before meeting my gaze again. "She said you might be mixed up with some bad things. You know, like drugs. And maybe even," she trailed off, but I knew what she was hinting at. "What?" I almost yelled, feeling my heart pound. "I would never, Mom, that's ridiculous. Why would she even say that?" But her face stayed calm, unreadable. "Cindy just said she heard things from her friends," she replied softly. "Her friends don't even know me." I shot back, somewhere between disbelief and pure rage. "I know, sweetheart, but this is serious. If there's anything you need to tell us, it's better if you're honest." I felt sick to my stomach. Cindy had somehow convinced my parents I was involved in drugs, and worse. The terrifying part? They were actually buying it, even without a shred of evidence. By the time I found Cindy that afternoon, My anger had boiled over. I cornered her near the pool, my voice low but trembling with fury. "What the hell did you tell Mom and Dad?" Cindy barely glanced up from her phone. "Oh, you mean the truth," she replied, a smirk plastered on her face. "You know that's a lie," I said, almost shouting. I didn't care who overheard. "Why would you even say that?" She looked at me, completely calm. "Because it's what everyone already thinks. I'm just helping them see who you really are." For a split second, I thought about shoving her, anything to wipe that smug look off her face. But I held myself back, not wanting to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. Instead, I took a shaky breath, my hands clenched, my jaw tight. "Fine," I hissed through gritted teeth. "But you'd better believe I'm not letting you get away with this." She just laughed, waving me off dismissively, like I was nothing more than a minor inconvenience in her perfect little world. She waved me off, like I was a joke. "Sure, whatever you say." The rest of the vacation was tense, to put it mildly. My parents kept their distance, watching me with these suspicious eyes, like I was some stranger lurking in our family. Meanwhile, Cindy was basking in the attention, playing the part of the innocent, worried little sister perfectly. I tried everything to get through to my parents, to make them see the truth, but the harder I tried, the guiltier I seemed in their eyes. Things didn't improve once we got back home. Cindy's rumor had taken on a life of its own, spreading like wildfire. At school, I'd catch people whispering and shooting glances my way, a mix of disgust and curiosity in their eyes. Overnight, my life felt like it had been ripped to shreds, and no matter what I did, I couldn't get a grip on it. Cindy didn't let up either. Every chance she got, she'd make some snide comment, just loud enough for people nearby to overhear. Things like, "Oh yeah, I heard she's making a lot of money on the side, if you know what I mean." Or, "I'd be careful around her if I were you." Each day became its own fresh nightmare. My friends started drifting away, unsure whether to believe the rumors or not. Even my teachers seemed wary, their glances lingering just a second too long, their questions laced with a hint of suspicion. It felt like I'd been branded, like there was this giant, invisible stain on me that no one would let me wash off. One day, I couldn't take it anymore. I cornered Cindy in an empty hallway at school, my anger barely contained. "Why are you doing this, Cindy? What did I ever do to you?" She looked at me with a bored, almost amused expression. "Maybe I just don't like you. Or maybe I'm just bored. Who cares?" I was stunned. I realized right then that there was no reasoning with her, no way to make her see how much damage she'd done. To her, it was all just a sick game, and I was nothing more than a pawn. I knew I had to fight back somehow, but I had no idea how far she was willing to go or how much damage she'd already caused. Once we were back from vacation, things at home went from tense to unbearable. It started with little things. Dad and my stepmom Rachel giving me those cautious, sideway glances whenever I walked into a room, like they were analyzing my every move. But soon, it grew into something bigger. It was as if Cindy's lies had planted this unshakable seed of doubt, and now they couldn't see me as their daughter anymore. One evening, a few days after we returned, I walked into the kitchen to find my dad waiting for me. He was sitting at the table, with Rachel beside him, both of them looking as though they were bracing themselves for something unpleasant. Dad's eyes held a mix of anger and disappointment I'd never seen before. "Sit down," he said, his voice stern, almost cold. Dad's frustration was barely contained as I took a seat across from him and Rachel. My heart was pounding. I knew this was about the rumors, but a small part of me was clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd finally believe me. Dad leaned forward, his expression stone cold. "We need to talk about what's going on with you." "What's going on with me?" I echoed, feeling a spark of hope. "Dad, I promise you, none of those rumors are true. Cindy's making everything up, and I honestly don't even know why." Rachel let out a long sigh, shaking her head. "We want to believe you," she said quietly, "but Cindy says she has evidence. Messages she's seen on your phone. People she's spoken to." I felt my jaw drop. Messages. Evidence. She hasn't seen anything because there's nothing to see. I have no idea who she supposedly talked to, but it's all lies. Dad crossed his arms, his face set, his voice low. "You're old enough to understand the consequences of your actions. If there's anything you need to tell us, this is your chance to be honest. We want to help you, but we can't if you don't admit what's really going on." I just sat there, frozen, speechless. How could Cindy's lies have taken such deep root? It was like I didn't even recognize my own parents. They were talking to me like I was some stranger who'd just wandered into their lives. "I don't know what Cindy's told you," I began, my voice trembling. "But none of it is true. I swear, I'm not doing drugs or anything illegal, or," I hesitated, hating the words that came out next, "or any of the other stuff she's accused me of. I'm your daughter, Dad. You know me." For a moment, I thought I saw Rachel's eyes soften. But then she glanced over at Dad, and her expression hardened again. "We thought we knew you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The frustration, the anger, the hurt all poured out of me. "This is Cindy," I said, my voice breaking. "She's doing this to hurt me. She's lying." Dad's face grew colder. "Enough," he said sharply. "Cindy is your sister. Why would she lie about something this serious?" I wanted to scream, to make them see that Cindy wasn't the innocent girl they thought she was. But the more I insisted, the deeper I seemed to dig myself. It was like I was trapped in a nightmare where every word I said only made things worse. And then, the real control started. The next morning, I reached for my phone, only to find it missing. Panic shot through me as I tore through my room, searching every corner. Finally, I stormed downstairs, only to find Dad sitting at the kitchen table, holding my phone in his hand. He looked at me with that same unreadable expression. "We're keeping your phone for a while," he said calmly, "until you earn back our trust." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "What? You can't just take my phone." Rachel stepped in, her face set with that same look of disappointment. Rachel stepped in, trying to keep her voice steady but avoiding my eyes. "It's for your own good. You've clearly been involved with some unsavory people. This is just temporary, okay?" I was furious. "So, you're punishing me for something I didn't even do? You're taking Cindy's word over mine." Dad's face went hard, his eyes steely. "Until we know we can trust you, there'll be no more secrets. No more sneaking around." From that day on, they monitored everything. Without my phone, I had no way to reach my friends, and at school, the rumors Cindy had spread were only growing. Every hallway felt like a gauntlet. People whispered, stared, even avoided me like I was carrying some contagious darkness. Even my teachers seemed different. Some looked at me with this wary, pitying expression, like they were waiting for me to break down. At home, things were even worse. Rachel started checking on me constantly, hovering like a shadow. She'd knock on my door every few hours, pretending to just see how I was doing. If I even took a minute too long in the bathroom, she'd knock again, asking if everything was okay. Dad wasn't much better. He wanted to know my exact location at all times. If I went for a walk, he'd text Rachel to find out where I was if I didn't get back in exactly the amount of time he expected. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. And every time I tried to explain or defend myself, they just seemed more convinced that I was hiding something. Then came the therapy sessions. Rachel found some behavioral specialist she insisted I see, saying it would be good for me to talk to someone. But I knew it was just one more way for them to monitor me. The therapist, Dr. Foster, was an older man with a soft voice and glasses that constantly slipped down his nose. At first, I thought maybe he'd actually listen. Maybe he'd see through Cindy's lies and help me prove I was innocent. But he looked at me with the same doubt as my parents, asking questions that felt all wrong. In one session, he glanced at his notepad and asked, "So, have you felt pressured lately to experiment with things that might help you fit in better?" "No," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "I don't do drugs, I'm not selling anything, and I'm definitely not doing any of the other things Cindy told my parents about." He nodded, scribbling something down on his notepad. "And how would you describe your relationship with your sister?" "Non-existent," I replied, flat and honest. "She hates me. Apparently." He tilted his head thoughtfully. "Do you think there's a reason for that?" I stared at him, realizing he didn't understand at all. He wasn't anywhere close to seeing what was really going on. Dr. Foster kept nodding, scribbling on his notepad, clearly convinced that I was hiding something. Each session left me feeling worse than the last. More misunderstood, more trapped. Back at home, Cindy's hold on my parents only seemed to tighten. I'd overhear them talking in hushed tones, and every so often, I'd catch phrases that made my heart sink. Out of control, needs help. They were talking about me like I was some stranger who'd lost her way, someone they needed to fix. Then, one night, I overheard Cindy on the phone with one of her friends. She didn't know I was listening, but her voice was low, dripping with satisfaction. "She totally lost it today," she whispered, laughing softly. I thought she was going to cry right in front of Dad and Rachel. A surge of anger ran through me. I almost burst in right then, but I forced myself to stay quiet, to listen. "It's like she actually thinks they believe her," Cindy continued with a snicker. "But whatever, as long as she's out of the way." Out of the way. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Cindy didn't just want to spread rumors, she wanted me out. Whether out of the family, out of trust, or just out of sight, I didn't know. But it was clear that she was determined to ruin my life, and nobody saw it but me. For the next few days, I tried to make myself invisible, hoping that maybe my parents would eventually see through Cindy's lies. But it only made things worse. Rachel took away my bedroom door key, saying it was for safety reasons. Dad insisted on driving me to and from school every day, saying he didn't want me getting mixed up with the wrong crowd. Piece by piece, I was losing everything. My freedom, my family, my reputation. Cindy had turned everyone against me, and I was powerless to prove my innocence. Every time I tried to tell my side, my parents just looked at me with that same disappointed, pitying expression, convinced I was lying to cover my mistakes. By the end of the month, I felt like a ghost in my own home, crushed under the weight of Cindy's lies. I was desperate to find a way out, to make them see the truth. But Cindy was always watching, always one step ahead, twisting things before I could even defend myself. I knew things were reaching a breaking point, but I still didn't expect what happened next. It was a Saturday evening, and I'd been tiptoeing around the house all day, trying to avoid Cindy, Dad, and Rachel as much as I could. Everything I did felt like it was under a microscope. I felt like a caged animal, scrutinized from every angle. Every step I took felt like it was being logged as another piece of evidence against me. Every whispered conversation behind closed doors made my skin crawl, and each night, as I lay in bed, I felt an increasing sense of dread. That night after dinner, Dad called me into the living room. The moment I saw Cindy sitting there, hands folded in her lap with that innocent, almost angelic look on her face, I knew something was terribly wrong. Dad's expression was cold, almost icy, and Rachel sat beside him, her face a mask of concern, though I could see a flicker of unease in her eyes. It was like they were gearing up for an intervention, and I was the only one who didn't know the script. "Sit down," Dad said, gesturing to the empty chair across from them. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for whatever this was. Dad cleared his throat, his voice faltering before he steadied himself. "We've been talking," he began, glancing at Rachel, who gave him a small nod. "We don't know what's going on with you anymore." "Going on with me?" I whispered, feeling my pulse pound in my ears. "Yes," Rachel added firmly. "We've given you every chance to come clean, to tell us the truth, but it's clear now that you're hiding something serious. We can't just ignore this anymore." I looked over at Cindy, who sat there with the faintest hint of a smirk, her eyes gleaming in triumph. The sight made me sick to my stomach. "I'm not hiding anything," I said, forcing myself to look directly at Dad. "Everything Cindy said is a lie. She's doing this to hurt me." Dad's expression shifted, his face showing a glimmer of heartbreak. "Why would your sister lie about something like this? She's only shown love and concern for you." I laughed bitterly, unable to believe his words. "Love and concern. She hates me. She's been spreading lies, trying to ruin my life, and you're all just falling for it." Rachel put a gentle hand on Dad's shoulder as if to steady him. "We've tried to believe you," she said softly. "But Cindy showed us things. Proof. Messages." "There are no messages," I interrupted, my voice shaking with frustration. "She made it all up. I don't know how, but she's lying." Dad looked at me, his face unreadable, and then he let out a long, defeated sigh. "I can't do this anymore," he muttered, almost to himself. Then he looked up at me, and in his eyes, I saw the cold finality of his decision. "Get out," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but it hit me like a hammer. "What?" I asked, stunned, not sure I'd heard him right. "You heard me," he said, his face like stone. "I want you out of this house." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My own father, asking me to leave. I searched his face for any hint of doubt, any sign that this was some kind of twisted test, but he just stared back, resolute. "Dad, please," I managed, my voice breaking. "Enough," he said firmly. "This is what you forced us to do." He looked away, as though the very sight of me was too painful to bear. Cindy sat there, silent but victorious, her lips curling up in a satisfied smile. I wanted to scream, to beg, to make them see the truth. But the look in my dad's eyes told me it was too late. The ground felt like it had crumbled beneath me. "You're kicking me out?" I asked, barely recognizing my own voice. The words sounded too big, too final, echoing around the room like they didn't belong. Dad wouldn't even look at me, his eyes fixed somewhere beyond, his face a mask I didn't recognize. "You made your choices," he said, his voice like stone. "And this is the consequence." Desperation clawed up my throat, but I forced it down. "I didn't do anything," I cried. "This is all Cindy. She's been lying to you. How can you not see that?" Rachel stepped in, her hand on Dad's arm, like she was bracing him as much as herself. "It's for the best," she said, her tone flat but her voice trembling just a little. "You need to find your own way. Away from all these negative influences." I stared at both of them, and for the first time, I knew the truth. They weren't listening. They were never going to listen. Cindy had done it. She'd turned them against me, made them see me as something twisted, something dangerous. I didn't even have the strength to argue anymore. I turned and walked to my room, my vision blurring as I stuffed whatever I could reach into a bag. Clothes, a toothbrush, my laptop, a book I loved. I wasn't sure where I was going, only that I couldn't stay here. Couldn't look at the people who had once been my family, who had now chosen a stranger's lies over the truth. I left without a backward glance, feeling the cold night air sting my face as I stepped outside. It was sharp, almost painful, a shock after the smothering heat of the house I'd left behind. I walked aimlessly down the street, my thoughts racing with a mix of fear and fury. My mind was burning, but my chest felt hollow, like my heart had been yanked out and left in that house. I had nowhere to go. My best friend Emma lived nearby, but I couldn't bring myself to show up at her door in tears, begging for a place to stay. I had nothing left to lose, but I couldn't lose my dignity too. So I just kept walking, hours passing as I wandered through empty streets, until I found myself at the old park I used to visit as a kid. I sat on a weathered bench, clutching my bag like it was the only solid thing left in my life. As the first light crept over the trees, illuminating the path I'd taken, a bitter reality settled over me. I was truly alone. I needed a plan, but the weight of that thought was crushing. I'd always thought of myself as strong, independent. But this was survival. The first days were a blur of cold, hunger, and exhaustion. I spent what little money I had on a run-down motel room on the outskirts of town, rationing stale sandwiches and soda, counting every cent humiliating or not. I applied for every job I could, fast food chains, grocery stores, places that didn't care about experience as long as you could show up. I didn't have the luxury of pride anymore. Eventually, I landed a job at a diner, working the late shift. It was greasy, loud, and exhausting, but it was something. The other employees kept to themselves, glancing at me with wary sympathy but not prying. And I was grateful. I had nothing left to hide, but I was terrified that if I started telling my story, I'd unravel completely. My coworkers at the diner didn't pry. They sensed that I was dealing with something heavy and respected my silence. But my manager, Lisa, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s with a tough exterior and a soft heart, took a special interest in me. Little by little, I found myself confiding in her, more than I ever planned to. Lisa never pushed me for details, but she listened, and in a strange way, she became my lifeline. "Kid, you're stronger than you think," she told me one night after a grueling shift. "Whatever you're dealing with, just remember, it won't last forever." Her words stuck with me, and for the first time since being thrown out, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could get through this. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into rebuilding some kind of life. During the day, I went to school. At night, I worked at the diner, scraping together enough to get by. I didn't see or hear from my parents, and I didn't dare reach out. Cindy had poisoned them against me so thoroughly, I knew that anything I said would fall on deaf ears. Then one afternoon, as I was getting ready for my shift, I glanced out the window and froze. Across the street, standing perfectly still, was Cindy, watching me. Her face was unreadable, but there was a slight smirk on her lips as she locked eyes with me. My stomach twisted with a sick mixture of anger and fear. What was she doing here? She didn't approach, she just watched me, her expression taunting, as if reminding me of the life she'd ripped away. After a few moments, she turned and walked off, leaving me shaken. I went back to work, trying to shake off the disturbing feeling, but Cindy's presence lingered like a shadow, a constant reminder of the family I'd lost and the life I couldn't get back. Every day felt like a battle, to keep going, to find some reason to keep moving forward. I was alone, abandoned, and betrayed. But somehow, I knew I had to keep fighting because if I gave up now, Cindy would win. And after everything she'd done, I couldn't let that happen. A few years passed since the day I'd been kicked out. Life had moved on in ways I couldn't have imagined, though I still carried a scar, a wound that hadn't healed. Living on my own had been hard, but over time, I found my footing. I'd managed to land a full-time job at a local bookstore, and it was exactly what I needed: quiet, predictable, safe. I'd scraped together enough to rent a small apartment, my own space, no one looking over my shoulder. My life was far from perfect. I still felt the ache of the family I'd lost, and I doubted that wound would ever fully close. But this life, imperfect as it was mine, built from nothing but my own strength. I'd taken the broken pieces and built something I could call a future, a life where, for the first time, I was free. I'd built this life from the ground up, without my family, without Cindy. I'd gone from a heartbroken, betrayed teenager to someone who could stand on her own 2 feet. But the pain of what I'd lost still lingered, like an old wound that would throb out of nowhere in the middle of the night. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. I was shelving books near the back of the store when I heard someone call my name. "Hey, aren't you?" I turned around, nearly dropping the book in my hand. Standing a few feet away was someone I hadn't seen in years: Josh, one of Cindy's ex-boyfriends. I'd barely known him back in high school, though I remembered seeing him with Cindy often enough. He looked different now, a little older, but with a haunted expression that made me uneasy. Just the thought of Cindy, even after all these years, sent a cold jolt through me. Yeah, that's me," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I help you with something?" Josh hesitated, glancing around as if he was worried someone might see him talking to me. "Listen, I know this is weird," he said, scratching the back of his neck, "but I needed to talk to you. About Cindy." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I don't want to talk about her," I said flatly, turning back to the shelf. The last thing I needed was to reopen wounds I'd spent years trying to close. "Please, just hear me out," he said, his voice low but urgent. "I don't know if this will make any difference, but I think you deserve to know the truth." The truth. The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. I glanced back at him, curiosity getting the better of me despite myself. "What are you talking about?" Josh took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I was with Cindy for a while, and she told me things. Things about you. Stuff she did." I crossed my arms, steeling myself for whatever he was about to say. Part of me wanted to run, to tell him to leave and pretend I'd never seen him. But another part of me, a part that had been waiting for answers, needed to hear it, no matter how much it hurt. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Cindy told me she lied about you. All those rumors, the stories she spread. She made them all up." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I just stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. She admitted it?" I asked, my voice trembling. Josh nodded, glancing away, his expression troubled. "She told me she was jealous. That she couldn't stand how much attention you got from your dad, from people at school. She felt like she was always in your shadow." He paused, looking at me with something that almost resembled guilt. "So, she did whatever she could to ruin that for you." The truth twisted in me like a knife, reopening wounds I'd thought I'd buried. "So, all those lies, all the things I went through, it was just her jealousy?" Josh nodded, his face shadowed with regret. "She made me part of it too, at least for a while. And I never had the guts to question it." He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I thought you should know. She ruined you because she thought you had it easier than she did. I didn't even know what to say. Rage, sadness, and relief mixed inside me, leaving me hollow and shaken. You have no idea what I went through because of her, I whispered. I know, he replied softly. And I'm sorry. I should have done something then. Without another word, Josh turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, still clutching the book in my hands. Cindy's lies had shattered my life, and now, years later, I was finally hearing the truth. I went back to work, but her ghost lingered, her presence haunting me once again. I knew I couldn't erase the scars, but maybe, just maybe, I could finally lay this chapter to rest. And that realization gave me strength. I'd been through hell, but I'd come out on the other side stronger than she could ever imagine. She hadn't broken me, and I wouldn't let her win. She felt like you were always overshadowing her, especially with guys, Josh continued, his voice low. So she decided to, well, make sure people saw you differently. A rush of anger and sadness hit me, dredging up emotions I thought I'd buried. All those years, I'd blamed myself, wondering what I'd done wrong, if somehow I deserved what happened. And now, to find out it had all been because of Cindy's petty jealousy? It was almost too much to bear. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, barely managing to keep my composure. Josh sighed, rubbing his hands together, visibly uncomfortable. I should have told you back then. I knew what she was doing was messed up, but I didn't want to get involved. I was young and stupid, thought it was just teenage drama. But over the years, it started eating at me. I couldn't stop thinking about how it messed up your life. I took a shaky breath, trying to process everything he'd said. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to ask why he'd stayed silent while Cindy ruined my life. But deep down, I knew he wasn't the real villain here. He was just another pawn in Cindy's twisted game. So, she admitted to lying? I asked, barely able to believe it. Josh nodded. Yeah. I think she thought it was funny. Or maybe she felt justified. She said she didn't regret it, that you deserved it for always being in the spotlight. I swallowed hard, feeling a fresh wave of pain. Cindy had destroyed everything. My family, my friends, my reputation, because of something as petty as jealousy. She'd taken it all from me, just to make herself feel better. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Josh shifted uncomfortably, as if he had more to say but wasn't sure if he should. Thank you for telling me, I said finally, my voice barely a whisper. I appreciate it. He nodded, looking visibly relieved. I'm sorry for everything. I know it doesn't change what happened, but I hope it helps. Even just a little. I forced a small smile, though I didn't feel it. It does. It's good to know the truth, finally. We stood there in awkward silence before he turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the quiet of the bookstore. As the door closed behind him, I felt an odd sense of relief, like a weight had lifted off my shoulders. But underneath it all, there was an emptiness, a hollow ache that refused to go away. I had the truth now, but what was I supposed to do with it? My family had abandoned me, thrown me out because of Cindy's lies. And even though I finally had confirmation that she'd lied, that didn't undo the damage. I didn't have the strength to reopen that old wound. I couldn't drag myself through that pain again, forcing my parents to see the truth they'd been too blind to recognize all those years ago. Maybe, in some twisted way, Cindy had won. She'd driven me away, broken our family, and left me to piece my life back together alone. Now, even with the truth in my hands, I couldn't bring myself to confront her or make her admit to what she'd done. I went back to work, shelving books and helping customers, trying to bury the conversation with Josh. But no matter how hard I tried to move on, his words haunted me. They lingered, casting shadows over my thoughts. I couldn't help but wonder what life might have been like if Cindy had never spread those lies. If my family had trusted me instead of abandoning me. In the end, though, I realized that none of that mattered. The past was just a painful chapter, one I'd closed long ago. I had my own life now, a life I'd built without Cindy, without my family, without the people who had turned their backs on me. And maybe that was enough. Maybe I didn't need to go back and fight for something that had been lost so long ago. I'd already moved on. I'd found my own path, and no matter how much pain Cindy had caused, she couldn't take that away from me. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of peace. Years passed since I'd walked away from the chaos Cindy had created in my life. In that time, I built a career, made a home, and, most unexpectedly, found love. It was almost ironic that Josh, Cindy's ex, became the one person who truly understood me. He'd seen the destruction Cindy had left in her wake, and he supported me as I rebuilt my life. Somewhere along the way, that shared history brought us closer, and before I knew it, we were inseparable. When Josh proposed, it felt like my life had come full circle. Everything I'd been through, all the pain and heartbreak, had led to this moment, a place where I could finally be happy and free. We planned a small, intimate wedding, a quiet celebration of the life we'd built together. Josh's family welcomed me with open arms, and for the first time in years, I felt like I truly belonged. But as much as I wanted to leave the past behind, the thought of not inviting my dad weighed heavily on me. After everything, I wondered if maybe he might see things differently now, if he might finally believe me. So, I decided to reach out, hoping that maybe, after all these years, he'd be willing to reconnect. The months after the wedding felt like a dream I never thought I'd live, a life filled with laughter, warmth, and a love that was real, solid. For the first time, I felt free of the shadows of my past. Josh and I had moved into a cozy little house on the edge of town, where we spent our evenings cooking together, talking for hours, and planning a future that was entirely ours. I'd finally carved out a life without fear or resentment, and for the first time, I truly felt at peace. Then, one evening, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen, and my heart dropped. It was my mom. I froze, just staring at her name. It felt like the past was clawing its way back to drag me under. I hesitated, nearly letting it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. "Hello," I managed, my voice tighter than I intended. There was a long, agonizing pause on her end, and then I heard her take a shaky breath. "Hi, it's me." Her voice was softer, almost hesitant, like she was afraid to push me away with a single wrong word. Hearing her voice again was like being plunged into icy water. 1,000 memories, good and terrible, flooded back all at once. My throat tightened. "Why are you calling, Mom?" There was another pause, heavy with unspoken words. I've missed you," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words cut deeper than I expected. I felt a surge of emotions rise, anger, sadness, a bitter ache that had never really gone away. "You missed me," I echoed, struggling to keep my voice steady. "After all this time." "I know," she whispered. "I know it's been a long time. Too long. But there's something you should know." Her tone shifted, and for a second, I thought I heard a tremble. She sounded different, like the proud, distant woman I'd known had been chipped away. My stomach twisted. "Mom, what is it?" She took another shaky breath, as if struggling to find the words. It's your father. He's sick. And it's serious." A chill ran through me, but I held back, my anger still simmering beneath the surface. "Why are you telling me this now? After everything?" "Because," her voice broke. "Because he's asking for you." I felt my defenses waver. The father who'd once been my whole world was now calling out for me, but I couldn't forget the man who'd turned his back on me when I needed him most. Part of me wanted to hang up, to protect the life I'd finally built for myself. But a small, stubborn part of me, the part that had always wanted my family to see the truth, was listening, hanging on every word. "Please," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He's asking for you. We don't know how much time he has." I stood there in the silence, the weight of her words pressing down on me, tearing open wounds I thought I'd finally healed. "This isn't just a casual call," Mom said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "It's about Cindy." My stomach tightened. "What about her?" There was a long, agonizing silence on the line before Mom spoke again, her words slow and shaky. She's in a rehabilitation center. After a suicide attempt." The words hit me like a freight train, crashing over me with a mix of shock, sadness, and something I couldn't fully place. I stood there, feeling the weight of everything Mom had just said, pressing down on me until I could hardly breathe. "I thought you should know," Mom continued, her voice trembling. "She's in a bad place, and we thought maybe you could come see her. I know things have been strained, but she could really use her sister right now." A rush of emotions flooded me: anger, sadness, confusion. 4 years, Cindy had done everything she could to tear me apart, to unravel my life piece by piece. And now, after all the destruction and heartache she'd caused, my family was asking me to come back. To put it all aside. To be there for her. I don't know, Mom, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. After everything that's happened, I don't know if I can just pretend it's all okay. Mom sighed, a sound so heavy, it felt like it carried the weight of a lifetime. I understand, she said softly, but she's still your sister. Those words echoed in my mind long after I hung up. She's still your sister. But was she? Cindy had hurt me more deeply than anyone else in my life. The scars of her betrayal were still raw, still aching, even after all these years. I knew that going back, seeing her again, getting drawn into that old world, would only reopen wounds I'd fought so hard to heal. In the end, I made my choice. I chose to stay away, to protect myself and the life I'd built. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was drowned out by the surge of relief that followed. I'd found peace, a fragile, hard-won peace, and I wasn't going to let anyone shatter it. Not even Cindy.